The Abyss was the most physically taxing film I've made because we were underwater so much. I think Avatar was certainly the longest and the most complex film that I've ever made. More complex than Titanic or the Terminator films or anything else. On those films, especially the Terminator films, we broke new ground with the CG effects and so on. And we were always trying to push the envelope. This time, it pushed back. And then we pushed harder. And it took a long time. There was no book to look this up. There was no manual for how you do this sort of film. And we were doing it very differently than previous performance capture films because we went beyond. It's by definition, as exploring a frontier, you're going to make mistakes. Well, we made mistakes, but we figured it out. I'm only smart enough to surround myself with enough smart people to solve the problems. And I had a great team because we were way out in the unknown, but that's cool. People have asked me, what was your inspiration? What was the trigger? They're looking for some kind of proximal cause, and there really isn't one, okay? It's my whole life. It's my entire childhood. I grew up in a town in rural Canada. I spent all my time in the woods. I loved critters, you know? I would catch anything that moved and study it, keep it as a pet, snakes, frogs, amphibians, whatever it was I could get my hands on. So I grew up with this kind of profound sense of wonder about nature. And I was also a science fiction and fantasy fan from the earliest time I can remember. And I was an artist. So my way of processing that was to draw and to paint. And I was painting creatures and painting alien worlds for as far back as I can remember. So Avatar is really the sum total of all that. There was no single moment of inspiration. Now, the thing that got me off my duff to actually sit down and write it, this movie that I'd had in my head for most of my life in some form or other, was that I was the CEO of a big visual effects company. And I wanted to challenge that visual effects company to go beyond, not just beyond what everybody else was doing, but beyond the beyond. I wanted to be so far out in front that nobody would ever catch us. And that's essentially what Avatar is. It's the most high-tech film in terms of its execution, dealing with essentially a very low-tech subject, which is our relationship with nature. And in fact, the irony is that the film is about our relationship with nature and how our technological civilization has taken us several removes away from a truly natural existence, and the consequences of that to us.
I first heard of Avatar when we were prepping Titanic, so it was 1995-ish, and Jim gave me a scriptment to read. And think of a scriptment as a novella with certain scenes broken out into dialogue.
Come on! Come on!
The essence of what I got out of reading the scriptment was that it was an emotional journey set in a world beyond what I certainly could have imagined.
I figured if we could do that, we could do anything. And of course, the answer that I got was, we can't do this. Nobody can do this. And that was in '95.
It was several years after that we started to even think about it. When we did some tests on Brother Termite, which was a movie that involved an alien character in Washington, D.C., and we needed this character to interact with humans. And we said to ourselves, we need to do that with performance capture. And we actually tested a whole sequence.
Marion, some of my people have disappeared. I need to know why.
And Jim envisioned doing the facial performance with an image-based process. That was the seed that really proved to us that there was the potential to finally be able to do a film like Avatar.
Avatar was written in '95 to be the next film after Titanic. And there was supposed to have been a continuity of work during the time that Titanic was being made to prepare us for making Avatar after Titanic. But we made a decision that it wasn't even worth putting together the couple of $1 million that we wanted to spend in research and development during that time, because we wouldn't be able to get there in that time period. So I went off and made Titanic, and then after Titanic, I got very focused on deep ocean exploration, and I did 6 subsequent expeditions, and my last expedition ended in summer of 2005, and that's when we started Avatar.
So we proposed to Fox that they support us for a year, and we would do several things during that year. First, we would research the technology. Could we really do the things we think we can do? And we'd begin to develop the art of the world so that they could get a visual sense of where this movie would take place.
We were doing 2 things simultaneously, and they involved 2 completely separate groups of people.
One was the technical side, led by Rob Legato and Glenn Derry, and the other was on the design side, where we brought in a handful of artists that included Neville Page, Yuri Bartoli, George Rochelle, Wayne Barlow and a gentleman by the name of Rob Powers. They went out to Malibu, where we set up in a facility so it could be near Jim, working on the designs for the film.
We got the best artists we could find that had excellent portfolios, beautiful work in the fantasy and science fiction area, brought them together, formed a small core team.
They wouldn't even tell me what the project was. I had no idea. We go in, we have this meeting with Jim, and we get the scriptment, we read the scriptment, and we start seeing all these big design possibilities. There's a whole world. We're salivating because this is the chance to really come up with some new stuff, you know, something really unique. It was going to be this really colorful jungle world, you know, of Pandora, very alien. That was one of the big issues at the beginning, was how alien do we get?
Mostly the process is you start out with the big broad strokes. So we would do tons of drawings, just sketch away until Jim sees something that feels like it's getting close. All the time you're trying to predict or get into his head and see what it is that he sees.
The Banshee is a great example of a creature that took a long time to create. It took almost 2 years to get the finished Banshees. What I kept coming back to them with, my question that I always pose to them is, what's the metaphor? What are we trying to say to the audience? What are we communicating with every bone and sinew that we put into this creature? And the answer to the metaphor question with the Banshee is, I want it to be a bird of prey. I want it to be like an eagle, but an alien eagle. You could apply that to all the different creatures. The metaphor for the Thanator, well, it was the biggest, baddest, meanest terrestrial predator in the entire Pandoran rainforest. And it actually landed pretty close to the initial description from 10 years earlier, which was that it was a black, armored, six-legged panther from hell.
A constant is that they're all hexapedal to some degree, meaning they've all got 6 legs or 6 limbs.
How do you make that work? Unfortunately, a real horse doesn't work with 6 legs, so you have to re-engineer an actual horse's anatomy, and that's kind of what we did.
So even the flying creatures, there's a vestigial element of that in it.
We looked at the colors of poison dart frogs and tropical reef fish.
This is one of the things that I think is going to separate all the creatures from a lot of creatures done in the past. These creatures are extremely colorful, very bright, very flamboyant. When you look at them, it's like, wow, it's like a big kimono coming at you.
The Na'vi took a long time to design, but the blue color was never in question because I felt that it was a fundamentally alien skin color that could be quite beautiful. But the idea that they incorporated animal-like features, cat's ears and cat tails and a slightly more protrusive muzzle and a kind of a flatter, more feline nose, big eyes, lemur-like eyes, this was all something that we arrived at over the course of designing these characters. We initially started out with kind of more amphibian-like and reptilian kind of forms and alien structures, you know, kind of antennae and things like that. And we kept realizing that it wouldn't work as a love story to see them not be attractive, but they couldn't be human. And then they kept coming back to just blue-skinned humans. We said, well, that's no good either. So we have to find ways of pushing away from human, but in a way that people would not find off-putting, and in fact might even find to be kind of quite beautiful. I wanted people to say, I want to be one of them.
Our art department started out working in flat artwork. We had nothing that we could hold up that was tactile in front of us. And we realized we had one of the great sculptors in our business on the show. And we tasked him with starting to sculpt out and build the characters.
One of the most important things about the maquette is not that you're just showing the design. What the maquette allows us to do, it gives it the human touch, and it also imbues the character with a sense of character that cannot be stressed enough. You get a sense of attitude. The amount of character that you can get in clay, as far as I see right now, is still superior to what you can get in just a digital rotatable model.
It's interesting. Stan Winston Studios did something on this movie that Stan Winston had not allowed them to do on any other movie in the past. They initially worked only as concept artists.
The Na'vis don't all look alike. They all look like Na'vis, but they all have very implicit and very distinctive characters. And that's, of course, what we're most proud of is you look at these characters and they are very, very rich and specific and quite mind-blowing.
When Jim first came to us, he was looking to help flesh out the Na'vi character. He already knew some of the parameters. They were going to have markings, and he knew the basic overall size. So that's what we started doing, was creating Na'vis, trying to get a photoreal kind of essence of these people.
What happened in April of 2005, Rob Legato came to us and showed us some tests that he had actually done where he used a virtual camera, but in a post-production method. And he had the idea that he could apply that same thing to performance capture.
How it started was essentially coming up with an emulation of how we like to make live-action movies.
Normally, you go into a film and you at least have a basic idea. There's a process that's been in place for, 100 years towards creating these images. But Jim wanted to do it different.
And I remember the day that Jim and John visited the Beowulf set, which basically was a blind cap paradigm, which means reference cameras only for the performances of your actors and not seeing any rendered caricatures or environments at all. And I saw this little glint in Jim's eye, and I knew he was up to something, but he didn't tell any of us. He didn't tell me. That's basically the genesis or the idea where he says, I think we can do a tool for the director, enabling him to come up with real-time performance capture.
So we had to come up with a way that was sort of director-centric and gave him the tool set that he needed to be able to work with.
I went to Jim, and I said, I can make this thing that you would like. So essentially, out of spare parts, made a virtual camera.
So we put you in a spatial volume.
The volume is the stage, and the stage is really what we can capture, what our cameras are seeing.
You've got a bunch of markers on the actor's body that are being picked up by hundreds of cameras. So the hundreds of cameras are providing different views of these markers. Each camera's image just looks like a cloud of dots. And then the computer is creating a real-time moving skeleton of you. From that skeleton, you now can drive a computer-generated character. And that image is then pumped out to me at the camera. When somebody is standing in front of the camera, I don't see them, I see their character. So I'm basically walking around with a monitor. There's no lens on this thing. It's just a markered object that the system recognizes as a camera and pointing it at things. And it's showing you what that would look like through a real-time computer render. So we call it a camera, but it's not truly a camera.
Good. Save that, please.
It wasn't until we brought in Rick Carter and Rob Stromberg that the world of Pandora really came to life.
Actually, I was only supposed to be on this film for 2 weeks. I came on because Jim needed help with a presentation to the studio. I did a couple of images, and Jim saw those and said, you know what, you're staying.
We are very lucky to have gotten Rick Carter to come on to our film. And he came in and he saw the movie on so many different levels.
I think that what's unique and special about Avatar is that it's an experience. The part of the job that matters to me is what's it about? The big questions of why, not just how are you going to do it, which of course you have to do, but you have to come up with the whys because those are what motivate you to actually inspire this army of people.
And he was able to bring into the fold Ryan Church and James Klein and others who just elevated everything. And he worked collaboratively with Rob Stromberg, and Rob and Rick shared the responsibility ultimately of designing the world.
This is a real alien planet. The degree to which Jim has thought through the ecosystems and the interactions. This is the first time I've seen anything like this.
When you first get there, it's actually a very scary place. We wanted to play out the haunted house factor, the sort of, you don't want to go in there. But then over time, as the characters develop, so does the environment. It develops into beauty, and you get to respect it much as the people who live there respect it.
It's a very primeval landscape. Huge, craggly mountains, exciting ring structures from magnetic fields and stuff like that, and then, of course, the giant floating mountains. So it's very science fiction, but yet we're trying to take those very science fiction things, but kind of ground that in sort of a reality. For inspiration, we looked a lot at various regions of China, such as the Guilin area and the Zhangjiajie area, because they have these limestone formations called karst formations. And we also reference a lot of South American jungle, a lot of Venezuela, areas around Tepuy and Angel Falls. For like the smaller things, such as the alien plants, we would reference a lot of small lichen, small succulents that actually exist on Earth, exotic flowers, and just really play up the scale of those.
Jim was really adamant about wanting Pandora to be possible. So his vision was to really have as much real and good science in it as it could be. On Pandora, or anywhere, The environmental factors that would have the most influence on plants would be the light, the solar radiation, which is needed for photosynthesis. So on Pandora, there's a very strong magnetic field and very weak gravity, so plants were able to grow much larger. So gigantism, the large trees, the large plants.
That is one big damn tree.
By starting out with the designs and the daytime stuff, it was after that that we got into the bioluminescence.
The idea that there is fairly low light could conceivably cause plants to evolve bioluminescence.
We wanted it to have this kind of dreamlike quality. But the eye needed to be educated through the experience of the film. First, we're going to fly down through clouds. Then we're going to go to this human base. Then we're going to move off that base out into the forest. But we're going to go out there in the daytime. And then we're going to gradually take you into that more and more alien experience of Pandora. And that was by design. We knew we were doing that because we knew that ultimately we were going to wind up in a fully CG rainforest with fully CG characters, and it had to look real.